I want to get the recorder. That one will be the on, and this one will be the receive. Thank you. And Megan, if you can turn that one on for the. Help me lift this so we can put this on. Oh, where's that microphone? No, that microphone. Alrighty. Thank you for going in my bag. Okay, and a pen. Okay, if you would like to go ahead. Bob, there's still a lot of people out there.
So is there a side for supporters and a side for
If you're here with a group.
second Thursday of the month to review cases. Staff to the commission is our urban design and historic preservation staff. They are available to answer questions, and if you have them, but please do not interrupt the proceedings. If you do indeed need to speak with one of them. The meeting generally proceeds with the staff calling the case and describing it. I will call for the applicant to come forward afterward to add to the basic description of the request if necessary, or if the applicant wishes to do so. If so, the applicant should keep the presentation to 10 minutes or less. The commissioners will then have the opportunity to ask questions. At this point, I would ask if there is anyone in the audience who wishes to speak for or against the proposal. The audience comments shall be kept to 2 minutes per person. If there is, the applicant will have an opportunity to respond. This rebuttal shall not exceed 5 minutes. In most of the cases, we will make a decision tonight after all the information has been presented. If your case is denied or you feel that our decision was made in error, you and anyone withstanding have the opportunity to appeal it within 30 days of the decision. If you plan to speak about a specific project, you must have signed in the sheet in the back of the room. Also, and so that the members of the public understand, the commissioners are under strict instruction to avoid discussing DDRC meetings and applications with members of the public or with each other outside of these proceedings to avoid ex parte communications. If you wish to speak during the course of these proceedings, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth in these proceedings? Thank you. Staff?
Mr. Bachnight?
Here.
Mr. Cohn?
Here.
Mr. Dinkins?
Here.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Here.
Ms. Moore?
Here.
Mr. Broom?
Here.
We have quorum.
What's the standing on the agenda?
There have been some changes to the agenda since it was published. Under the consent agenda, item number 8, 1300 Pickens Street, a request for design approval for exterior changes in the City Center Design Development District has been withdrawn. Likewise, under the regular agenda, item number 5, under the historic portion of the agenda, 1700 block of Calhoun Street, intersection of Calhoun and Talley Streets, which is a rehearing request for design approval for modifications to the landmark wall on the former State Hospital grounds, currently the Bull Street neighborhood, was an appeal to a staff decision for an individual landmark, and that has been deferred. And our last deferral is 1101 Pine Street, Chappelle Memorial AME Church, which was a request for design approval for an addition in Old Shandon, Lower Waverly Protection Area A.
Is there anyone who wishes to take an item off the consent agenda for discussion? I would like to make a motion to approve.
If I could read the consent agenda, I'll
Okay,
read through
before that?
each of those for y'all.
Okay. The DDRC utilized a consent agenda for those projects which require DDRC review, but which meets the guidelines and typically require no discussion. If anyone wishes to discuss an item on the consent agenda, I would ask that you speak up after the consent agenda is read, and if we can pull the item for discussion on the regular agenda.
Okay. Our first item is 141 Edisto Avenue, a request for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill in Wales Garden Architectural Conservation District. The next is 331 Piccadilly Street, a request for design approval for exterior changes and for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill in the Granby Architectural Conservation District. The next is the Bull Street Campus Laundry Building, a request for a recommendation for approval for a landmark designation. The next is 950 Hardin Street, 948 Hardin Street, 940 Hardin Street, 938 Hardin Street, all of which are requests for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill, with 950 Hardin Street also including some exterior alterations. This is in the Five Points National Register District. 808 King Street, a request for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill in Old Shandon Lower Waverly Protection Area. And 1328 Laurel Street, a request for design approval for new construction in the City Center Design Development District, Landmark District.
Thank you. Is there anyone who wishes to take the item off the consent agenda for discussion? All right, I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda and the meeting minutes for the month of December.
I'll second that.
Vote?
Mr. Bachnight,
Yes.
Mr. Cohn,
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins,
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt,
Yes.
Ms. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Broom.
Yes.
Motion passes.
It looks like we have an executive session scheduled. Do I have a motion to move into the executive session?
I'll make the motion that we move into executive session for legal counsel with regard to 117 Lincoln Street,
As well as the items that are listed on the agenda.
as well as the items on the agenda.
Thank you.
Second.
Vote?
Mr. Bachnight,
Yes.
Mr. Cohn,
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins,
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt,
Yes.
Ms. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Broom.
Yes. I'd like to make a motion to move out of the executive session and back into the regular meeting.
Second. I'll second.
Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Mr. Cohn?
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Broom?
Yes.
Motion passes.
There was no action taken.
I'm sorry.
There was no action taken.
Thank you.
Staff, please.
So the first case on the regular agenda is 1600 Gervais Street. This is going to be like one presentation, but there's two motions. This has a site plan review associated and a design review. This case is, the proposal is for an 8-story multifamily residential building with low-grade parking in the City Center Design Development District. Is a request for a certificate of design approval for new construction. The site is located at the southeast corner of Gervais and Pickens, sharing the block with the First Church of First Church of Christian Science Building, the McMaster School, the Complete Car Care Auto Repair Shop. To the north across Gervais is the Hilton Garden Inn. To the east across Henderson are some 1 to 2 story office and institutional buildings. On the block to the west across Pickens is the new U of SC Law School building and 2 landmark structures, the Oregon Yard House and the Taylor House. I think Jonathan's going to talk a little bit about the site plan overview, and then we will pass it on to the applicant to make their presentation.
Correct. There are existing buildings on the site, as Lucinda indicated, and this project entails the demolition of the existing buildings and construction of a 426,000 square foot, 8-story, 271 unit apartment building at the southeast corner of Gervais and Pickens Street. The required parking for the development is 480 spaces, whereas the applicant is proposing to provide 348 of those spaces within the parking garage that will be constructed with the building, and then an additional 132 parking spaces that are located within 400 feet of the site, which is allowed by the DD district. In addition to that, there will be bicycle parking provided as well. There are various off-site improvements to include landscaping, drop-off lane, and access to the building will be from the parking garage along Pickens Street.
And then the staff recommendation on the design review is that staff finds the proposal substantially meets the city center design guidelines and recommends approval conditioned upon the following items be reviewed and approved by staff or by the commission at the commission's discretion. That the design be considered with brick up to the top floor and or more brick be considered on the rear elevations. The depths and projections of exterior features, material adjacencies, and the depth of rear elevation windows be increased significantly. Some planting or other method be used to soften or add interest to the transformer screen on Gervais Street. Any roof-mounted utility equipment be located so as not to be viewed from the public right-of-way, and all other details be reviewed and approved by staff. And now we're going to hand this over to the developer, Linda Irving from Trinitas, is going to come and make a presentation. So I'll give you control of the clicker.
Good afternoon. I'm Linda Irving with Trinitas Ventures. I am the development manager for the project that we're about to review. I'm Linda Irving with Trinitas Ventures. I'm the development manager for the project we're going to review with you this evening.
Use your microphone.
Are you able to
toward
hear
your
me
mouth,
okay?
please.
Sorry.
Louder the better.
All right. Well, we appreciate this opportunity to walk through our plans with you, get your comments, and hopefully be able to address any questions that you have. This development endeavor has been underway behind the scenes for almost a year and a half. During that time, we've had opportunities to not only meet with zoning and planning in person, but also we've had a number of conversations that have informed our design progress. We find their input has been quite valuable and informative for us. Specific to the building design, the input we received not only from the planning department, but also the University Hill neighborhood representatives and the university's architectural representative. It was thoughtful input, and it has helped inform our design progression, even so much as the formal comments that we just received on Tuesday. We've reviewed those with the planning department, and we feel pretty comfortable that we'll be able to address their recommendations to their complete satisfaction. As Lucinda had mentioned, on high level, our project is at the corner of Pickens and Gervais, 276 units. It's comprised of studios, 1s, 2s, and 3-bedroom units. A total of 493 available parking spaces, of which 348 are constructed on the premises. We pulled together a team that we feel is well-rounded for the design project. We have national representatives for architecture, and we have great local representatives for civil engineering and landscape architecture. Super excited of how the team has worked, and we're very pleased with their work product. As a matter of fact, we are going to have each of the experts present their respective work tonight and hopefully answer any questions you might have on their specific scope. From civil engineering side, we have Bruce Todd with RB Todd. We have Mark Cotterill of Grimble Cotterill, and then our HED architectural representatives are Jean McDonald and Bernard Vilza. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to the experts that put this together to meet the guidelines, and then I'll be prepared, and we'll be prepared to answer questions at the end. So I'm going to turn over to Bruce.
Afternoon. I'm Bruce Todd with RB Todd Consulting Engineers. I wanted to talk briefly about the site itself. You can see that it is currently developed with 3 existing buildings on 3 separate parcels. Those 3 parcels will be combined into one going forward, which was requested by the city. The existing site is almost 100% impervious, being paved and having rooftops. Our project proposes that we will be obviously demolishing all of that and replacing it with our development, which will actually increase the pervious nature of the site and improving the stormwater management part of the project. Regarding on-street parking, there are currently 4 spaces along Gervais Street along the front of the property. Now that we're going to be closing several of the driveways, that will allow us an opportunity to provide additional on-street parking. We'll be able to install 9 spaces. And in addition to that, we will also be installing an Uber drop-off pickup location in front of the main entrance of the building. One key item of the project, obviously, is vehicular ingress and egress. We were requested by the city to complete a traffic impact analysis, which we have completed. The traffic impact analysis stated that we needed to have right turn in, right turn out, ingress and egress from the site. And to accomplish that, you can see on the screen here, we're installing a concrete median along Pickens Street. I've coordinated with David Brewer at the city about that. So that will allow us to prevent cars from turning left into the site from Pickens. Okay. And then that would also require a right turn out to Gervais Street. And those are probably the primary aspects of the site design. And I'll turn it over to Mark Cotterill, the landscape architect.
Just a reminder, everybody please speak louder, because I imagine this is being recorded. So we want to make sure we got it all.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Cotterill at Grimble Cotterill & Associates Landscape Architects. Now we'd like to look at the pedestrian zone outside of the building. Along the Pickens Street side, the west side of the building, you can see there's a streetscape that is developed with a tree planting zone that would have shade trees, low shrubs, and ground covers. That's about 10 feet wide, separating the pedestrian from traffic. There's an 8-foot sidewalk, and then there's a planting zone next to the building. On the north facade, there is an 8-foot sidewalk with a 6-foot planting zone for trees, lights, shade trees, and low plantings, and that would separate the pedestrian from parking and traffic on the north side. The sidewalks are scored concrete, except for at the main entrance, which would be noted by a special pavement. City staff had requested where the transformers are located on the northeast corner that we would do some type of planting along with the screening. There's some screens there along in front of those transformers, and so we would plant that as well. On the south facade, next to the church, there is an 8-foot solid wood screen between the property and the church, as well as tree plantings and shrub plantings. And along that edge, we have bicycle parking, okay, for visitors. There's also bicycle parking located at the main entrance. Between the university, there's also a 6-foot aluminum fence with trees planted. Those trees are not required, but the project decided that we would go ahead and install those as a buffer screen between the university and the project.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. We're with HED Architects. My name is Gene McDonald, and I'm here with Bernard Vilza, and Bernard will kick it off here.
Good afternoon. So, as it was explained, this project is meeting all the requirements as far as the setbacks go. We are planning on building up to 75 feet, which we are allowed by zoning. And to do that, we have to set the building back, which it works in terms of the design of the streetscape, as explained by Mark. We are showing here a top view, high level of the building footprint, what happens above level 1, and we're showing that we have 2 smaller courtyards which are connected on level 2 as well. As far as building sections go, this is a podium building, which means we have 5 stories of wood construction over 3 stories of concrete over grade, and then we are showing 3 levels of parking below grade to get our 348 spaces. Our level 1 is mainly comprised of our amenity spaces. So you enter off the center from Gervais Street, and you approach it into a main lobby where the leasing spaces are with staff on the property all the time, and we are showing all the amenity spaces, which are pretty much clubhouses, leisure areas, activity like gym and so on. And then into the back of it, we're showing parking, which through a ramp gets down to 3 levels below grade. This is our level 2 residential and also amenities deck on level 2 to the back of the building, which is connected by a breezeway, 2-story breezeway, into the 2 courtyards. We are showing leisure activities and sort of relaxed points into the courtyard, including a pool, which will be screened and landscaped onto the south side, and also mainly small grill areas and lounge and relaxation areas. This is our level 3 residential, which shows the 2-story breezeway space to connect the 2 courtyards for better airflow, and our typical residential floor. And with that, I'll leave it to Gene to explain the architecture.
So this is the initial image that we submitted to the city, and we'll start to dive into just some of the various aspects of the facade design. And this view in particular is looking from Gervais and Pickens in that main prominent corner. So looking at the neighborhood in general, there is quite a mixture of facade language and materiality in the neighborhood. And that can vary between concrete finish, EIFS finishes, brick, and a number of different styles and typologies. This is one image of our building looking from the university towards Gervais from that south side. And one of the things we're trying to do is, as we actually wrap the corner of the building, we're actually wanting to pull the brick around and create a sort of focal points on those end pieces and sort of bookends of the building. So trying to bring that materiality, the better materiality to the brick, sort of around the corners of the building. Here is an image looking from the U Hill neighborhood. Once again, really mirroring the other side of the building that we just saw, wrapping that brick around the corner, trying to find some focal elements that define those edges. Here, I think one of the things to note, especially with the north elevation, which is the main Gervais elevation, is just our one of the things we've really been trying to do meaningfully here is think about the ground level and how the ground level really engages the community. So something that's vibrant and glassy and actually has more of a sort of an urban type feel at the ground level. But then above that, we switch to the brick. And in the brick, we have two different brick variations. One which is essentially a brown variation, closer to the to the University Inn down the road, in that sort of range, and then contrasting that with a slightly darker brick at key elements like the entry and the corners and other elements that are recessed on the building, especially at the ground level. So trying to make some of those areas a little more rich as they engage with the pedestrian public. And here is the south elevation. So this is the elevation where we actually have the courtyard, the raised courtyard. And you can see those ends that I talked about earlier, that I referenced earlier, about sort of creating these bookends and a sort of focal point for the south side of the building. And this is the area that will get quite a bit of sun and will sort of come into that amenity deck that is open within the building. But then those brick ends sort of wrap around the sides. Here, in the very beginning, we looked at we've looked at a number of various materials for this project, and that can range between medium density fiberboard and many different brick variations that we see in the community and the neighborhood, and then also glass variations and sort of how we treat punched openings, larger glass expanses on the building. But we have studied quite a few different options, especially on the brick side, ranging between these colorations that we see in the area. And here you can see just some more defined notes about what these materials are. One of the comments we received from the city was about actually accentuating the punched openings and having them a little bit deeper. So one of the things we're trying to do is make sure that that fenestration across the board on our punched openings actually has some depth so that we get nice shadow lines. So when we actually detail this building, the idea will be that these punches actually pop a little bit. And we think that's important, and we agree with that those comments by the city. So as I commented earlier, this is the original submission. We've already received some additional comments from the design committee, and a couple more thoughts. As you can see in this original one, the brick was actually further down on the facade, and that capital was a little bit larger. That capital band, I would call it, at the top was a little bit larger. Now we've looked at potentially extending that up. We think that that does some nice things. And then also another variation on that is actually bringing that potentially across those openings where we have the medium density fiberboard currently, and actually framing those and making the expanse of the brick feel like it's going across the entire facade. So just very quickly, once again, you can see some of these based on the commentary we've already received from the city. So we do agree with the commentary, and we're working with the city, and we think that some of these will help the project. And that's it. Thank you.
I guess this is where we ask you for your comments, your feedback, and any questions you might have. I still may have to defer to my experts on various pieces of your feedback, but...
I have a question. On the east elevation facing USC, I need to see that.
East elevation is coming from the university going up Pickens, or let's see. East
Well, there's a church next door.
So east elevation is actually the car care side of our building.
Are there any options like you did before on the east elevation?
Oh, so what he demonstrated in those last two slides is what we are going to carry forward. He just took a stab at the first elevation to address the feedback we got from the planning department. So we will further develop the other elevations then based on that
And that's
feedback.
option number 2?
There were two scenarios. So that was what was presented. This was option 1, and this is option 2.
And that continues to the rear elevation? As
It
in the
continues
recommendation?
to any location in which we have the brick. I think we'll find a way to make sure that that mass and that rhythm makes sense.
Any other questions?
I have a question. It's just small in there. Between the floors on the residential areas, what's the floor-to-floor spacing?
Floor to floor. Oh, clear or just full floor?
Yeah.
I knew that asked me a question.
Is not.
Please step forward.
You have to come to the
9
mic.
feet 4. I knew I should have been prepared.
We're showing 9'4" floor to floor on the residential spaces, and we're showing 10 feet on the ground floor. That is to be able to fit within our 75-foot height clearance that we. And in order to do that, we had to sink our corner at Pickens and Gervais 3 foot 4 inches to be able to stay within the height limit.
And that has a lot to do with why we moved the entrance to the middle of the block, because at the corner of Gervais and Pickens, you'll be walking on the sidewalk and looking kind of across and down into our space. When you get closer to our entrance, we're flush with grade.
And then from a mechanical standpoint, as far as rooftop units and screening, I know we have a comment. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. We have a section which I should have mentioned. On the very top, we do understand that the parapet height is not included into the 75-foot height calculation. So in order to fit our rooftop units, they are estimated to be at 3 foot 10 inches right now. We're showing a 4 foot parapet, so we should not be able to see them from ground plane or as you approach it.
Is the elevator going to the roof?
No.
So you're going to have a penthouse and it still fall within 75 feet?
Absolutely. We will have a penthouse for the elevator. This will be a machine roomless elevator, so we estimated that it's not shown in this section, but we do estimate that the penthouse should be at about 6 feet over the roof line, which puts it at 15 foot 4 inches above the last floor which it serves. And we do understand that the elevator penthouse is not included in the height calculation at all.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak in favor of? Nobody here for favor? How about against? Step forward. Have you signed in?
I have, yes.
Okay.
But I have not been sworn because I was signing in when the swearing took place. So, someone was swearing in.
You affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Okay, carry on.
Thank you. Members of the DDRC, my name is Tom Gottschall. I'm the president of the University Hill Neighborhood Association. I live at 1824 Senate Street, which is approximately 2.5 blocks down Senate Street from this project. Representatives from the University Hill neighborhood, from Historic Columbia Foundation, and also from the University of South Carolina are here and jointly oppose this project, and will speak about that opposition. The primary opposition that we have to this project's proposal is its mass and design, and the consequences that flow from that mass and design. I listened to the presentation. One thing they don't mention is students. The Trinitas deals in student residences, and this is to be rented by the bed. The 271 units have 540 beds. It's to be rented by the beds to students. Now, my house has about 4,000 square feet. This has 1,000 times the square footage of my house. Our neighborhood, has been developed over a number of years, restored, renovated. The primary structure are late 19th century, early 20th century two-story structures. And indeed, there is an architectural conservation district that covers this, and it provides guidelines for the exterior of these buildings. For height, it says the characteristic height in UACD is 2 stories. New buildings must be constructed to a height compatible with the height of surrounding buildings. Then it says size and scale. The size and scale of new buildings shall be visually compatible with surrounding buildings. Now, this is not in our neighborhood, but this is adjacent to our neighborhood. And to have a building of this mass, this just overwhelms what has been preserved here for many, many years and challenges the stakes that the residents have. The stakes of the residents are these are their primary homes. These students are not stakeholders in the way that we are. What will 540 students do Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night as they're moving to 5 Points through our neighborhood late at night? I asked if I could spend a little more time with staff so I could have a few. So we have 540 students going down late at night, coming back, the possibility of that. I estimate the non-student population of our neighborhood at something less than 1,000. There's a National Register designation for our neighborhood. We had 160 contributing structures and 13 non-contributing. So I estimate about 1,000. This is more than 50% of the present non-student population of this neighborhood, so it's a big challenge. It also calls into question the principle that the University of South Carolina and our neighborhood has worked on. We have worked together. As a consequence, they have moved their residence development west, like Lincoln Street, south, like south of Pickens Street on the hill. We have a cooperative agreement that we signed with the university in 2003. They sold some of their properties in our neighborhood. That was ratified again with an amendment in 2018. But the consequence of this has been that the university, as we have tried to preserve this neighborhood, it is low density, yet this is very high density. There has been no high rise of this nature constructed south of Gervais Street in this quadrant in 40 years. And this really breaks, I think, that principle. Let me conclude by saying this. Gervais Street, on which this project fronts, is in the city center guidelines referred to in paragraph 2.5.1 as the city's formal front door. And it says that treatment should be of the, quote, highest caliber, that is the development. I don't think this meets that standard. This is the capital city of South Carolina near very dignified buildings like the Law School and the State House. So we oppose it for those purposes. Also, the city center guidelines say that no more than 5 stories is the usual for the center city. That's 5.3.1. Now, we know there are exceptions, and the guidelines call for exceptions. So thank you for listening to me. We have a number of people who will speak, but I'd like to first have those people who are here from the neighborhood and otherwise and who oppose us to please stand. Thank you. I'd like to now turn it over to Robin Waits, who's from Historic Columbia Foundation. Thank you so much for your attention.
I have a question for Mr. Chambers. Is the use classified as a private dormitory or apartments?
Apartments.
Okay, so it is not private dormitory geared towards students.
There are, the maximum bedroom count is 3, which is an apartment.
Good evening. I'm Robin Waits. I'm the Executive Director with Historic Columbia. As y'all know, the University Hill neighborhood is both a National Register listed historic district as well as the highest level of a local landmark district to architectural conservation. And as such, it stands as one of the most intact historically residential and institutional districts in Columbia. Protecting the interior as well as the boundaries and the viewshed of this district are key to retaining its unique character. The proposed project does the opposite of that. As outlined in the city center guidelines which govern the site, a new construction should be sympathetic in height, mass, and scale with its surrounding buildings. Specifics of those guidelines are in 5.2 and 5.3. 5.2, which addresses architectural style or theme, says, quote, projects should be sympathetic and compatible with surrounding buildings in terms of mass, scale, and height. And 5.3 on building height says the most fundamental guidance for building heights is that the minimum for any new building should typically be 2 stories and no more than 5 stories. The city must be consistent in considering the height of the proposed structures as they relate to the adjacent development context. That's in the guideline. The structure simply does not meet the guidelines, contrary to the inaccurate renderings on page 25 to 26, which show the church portico piercing the 4th floor windows are roughly half the height of the apartment building, as well as on page 28, in which the church is shown with the sills of the 7th floor windows, which is about 3/4 of the height of the apartment building. The new construction will considerably dwarf the former Christian Science Church and McMaster buildings to its rear, as well as the Whaley House that stands at its northwest cross. It creates a massive, monolithic, uninspired curtain that veils the Pickens Street entrance into this district and is completely out of context with the size and the mass of its neighbors. While there are exceptions in the neighborhood, many of which were constructed before the local landmark district was in place, these guidelines reiterate that there should be harmony and scale with neighboring buildings, as is represented by the drawing in the guidelines on 5.2. In sum, Historic Columbia opposes this project based on its failure to meet guidelines 5.2 and 5.3.
Excuse me, ma'am. I just want to make sure that you signed in and you were sworn in, right? Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Derek Gruner. I'm the university architect from the University of South Carolina. I have just a couple of points to make. I will be brief. The University of South Carolina is sympathetic to the University Hill as they oppose this development because as a consequence it will intensify the student presence adjacent to and through their neighborhood. And we acknowledge that that's a concern for the neighborhood. Secondly, I can confirm that the master plan for the university for a great many years now has tried to direct development and expansion to the south and to the west in deference to the neighborhood. And lastly, I would just ask that as the committee considers what is an appropriate architectural massing for development on the site, that they seek a sophisticated balance of a project that's appropriate as a gateway element on the Gervais Street corridor, but also balance that with what is appropriate with the height and the scale and the mass with the surrounding historic properties as well as the neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are you sworn in?
I am.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is John McGill. I'm a retired engineer. I reside in the University Hill neighborhood, and I'm the treasurer of the neighborhood association. I want to speak specifically to this massive humanity that this project will foist upon the neighborhood. 540 students, every day they will need to go to class. They will be going through the neighborhood. The only exception will be students at the law school. All the others will go right through the neighborhood from the north boundary to the south where the main campus is. And they will be mostly on foot, I would suspect. There has been a traffic study that shows an additional, I think it's 30 to 40 automobiles coming in and out of the proposed building in the morning and about 60 or 70 in the evening rush hour. But that's a very small proportion of the 540 students. All the rest of them are going to be on bicycles or mostly on foot, I would suspect, traipsing through the neighborhood on the sidewalks, crossing all the intersections on the way to class, and the same thing coming back in the evening. There's a second aspect to this, which Tom briefly mentioned, and that is the Thursday, Friday, and Saturday evening parties down at 5 Points. Not all of the 540 students, I'm sure, will go down there, but a significant proportion of them will. And we all know from the newspaper articles that have been published in recent months the kind of damage and vandalism and just altogether bad behavior that happens in the small hours of the morning as these students come back through the neighborhood. If you look at the map, the only sensible way from 5 Points to this building is right through the heart of our neighborhood. And I would ask the committee to not approve this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Sworn in? Have you been sworn in?
Yes, sir. I am sworn in. My name is Beth Richardson, and I am a property owner in the University Hill neighborhood, more specifically at 15 Gibbs Court. I actually was before the DDRC not too long ago asking for a variation to some of the architectural guidelines that apply to our neighborhood. I'm here to reiterate, not to just merely reiterate everything that my fellow neighbors and Ms. Waits from Historic Columbia have said to you, as well as Mr. Gruner from the University Hill, but just to stand as an example of somebody who bought into University Hill because we wanted to uphold the architectural guidelines that were imposed upon these very special homes that are in this neighborhood. And we, along with many other of our neighbors, have made very significant investments into our homes and plan to maintain them. And we consider our neighborhood to be a very special place in Columbia, one in which people can look to and say that there is nice old homes that are being maintained and preserved. I believe that this proposed development can put all of our properties in significant jeopardy because of the traffic that will proceed through the heart of our neighborhood from this development into 5 Points. And there must be some kind of consideration between the two zones that they are sympathetic and compatible to each other. For that reason, I don't believe that this proposal meets with the standards that should be applied to it as far as development as close as it is to our neighborhood perimeter. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Catherine Fenner. I am sworn in. I am the Vice President of the University Hill Neighborhood Association, and I live at 700 Henderson Street. We reiterate that we are opposed to putting a big box with 540 students. It's going to smother our historic neighborhood. It is out of scale, height, mass scale. It is sympathetic insofar as those corner windows will reflect the hotel across the street, which I didn't get a good picture of, but y'all may recall the two-part hotel that's there. We are very concerned that students will be decorating and putting their individual stamp on those windows, which are facing our formal front door. And I believe there was a question about the private dormitory. No, it's not a private dormitory zoning, but Trinitas does student housing. That's what they do. It's clear that I would bet that 99.9% of the occupants will in fact be students. All students aren't bad. I'd love it if they would be a much smaller thing. That'd be fine. But we are in fact opposed to this, and we hope that you would apply the guidelines more fairly, factoring in the step down and other blending needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? You signed in?
I did sign in. I need to be sworn in, though.
Affirm the truth?
I promise to tell the truth.
Thank you.
My name is April Lucas. I live at 911 Lauren Street, and I've lived there for 33 years. So I love the neighborhood. We have many, many friends there. It's a thriving, dynamic neighborhood. However, with development, if we don't raise our hands and tell you when we have problems, then how do you know? Well, we do have problems. We have lots of problems that are created between students and 5 Points. and it's spilling over into our neighborhood. We have people banging on our doors at 2:30 in the morning. I cannot imagine what it would be like to have 540 additional students traveling through our neighborhoods at all hours. I don't think it will be beneficial, and in fact, I think it could produce dire consequences. I'd like to call your attention to section 2.1.5 of the City Center Plan. And that plan says, I quote, that it's recommended that any plans consider the reinforcement of existing neighborhoods within and adjacent to the city center. That's us. And so we think you have a duty and a responsibility to consider the impact on our neighborhood from this project. Frankly, it looks beautiful, looks like a nice project, but not at that location. They need to listen to the university. They need to consider the university's plans to move that kind of development to other locations in the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
May I add one comment?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you so much. We met with the Trinitas people, and they confirmed to us that they are in the business of student housing. This is student housing, and they will, I mean, it's private, it's not public, but it will be rented by the bed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that the case? Is that the case, Ms. Irving?
Ms. Irvin, you need to come to the microphone. This is being recorded.
Specific question, is it rented by the bed?
That's one of our leasing platforms, but we are not able to restrict our residents. If the majority of our residents are students, it's not the only type of resident we're allowed to have apply and accept them as a resident.
Who is your target audience?
We're a university-centric developer. Being by the law school is actually a great thing. We think that there's an opportunity for grad students, young professionals that want to live and that maybe work in the downtown area and want to be able to walk to their place of business. So we think it's a great location for any number of types of residents. Again, being by the law school, that's really a great opportunity. And I don't know if I can just speak, I'd love to allow our architect to speak to the height and give you some comparisons just so that you have some facts to address. And I can't speak to the use because from everything I understand, we are compliant with zoning for our use and our height. And I don't think that that's what we are here to debate, but I would love to have our architect talk to the height. Thanks, Jean.
I just wanted to make a very quick point here. This drawing here, we do our best to do things to scale, but we do not have drawings of these surrounding buildings. So much of when we show a streetscape like this, we're trying to do our best to sort of mimic what we believe the height is. And the height, as we understand it, for that corner directly across the street is the law building, which is over 60 feet. We are at 75 feet. The hotel across the street is 70 plus feet in height. So to say that we are not in keeping with the adjacent buildings, I think is incorrect. I would also say, just to add to this, that every aspect of what we have done thus far has been in keeping with the native zoning that has been given to us by the city. And we have done the best of our ability to follow that rule. And I would think that it would set a bad precedent to go case-by-case basis with all the hard work that's been done on the zoning over the decades. Just a quick thought there. That's it. Thank you.
Step forward. I affirm to tell the truth.
I do.
You signed in, sir?
No, sir.
Please sign in.
My name is Douglas Carlisle. I reside at 1104 Gregg Street, and I echo many of the comments about students who have trooped through the neighborhood. Myself have seen a student who is thought to be dead by some passersby who encountered a gravity storm on the way back to his residence, which was only a quarter of a block away, and could not stand and was eventually taken away by a USC policeman. Students at 2:30 in the morning waking me up, yelling. A student urinating in my driveway. I didn't actually get the tape from my neighbor because that would make the student classified as a sex offender, and they are young. I urge the members to look at the diagrams for the apartments and see if they think that an ordinary working or professional person would actually find them attractive, or whether they are in fact designed, most of them, to attract students. This is a case of a temporary gain for the people who are involved in this, but the long-term return on property, long-term, is about 5%. But it's not evenly distributed. It's front-weighted. And what happens after it is built? What happens to the traffic there? It says 70 or 80 cars, but suppose more decided to enter Gervais Street. That block of Gervais Street is where the traffic backs up both ways. In fact, one of the reasons it backs up is there's a crosswalk 1 block down for students coming up from there, on Barnwell Street. So, what's going to happen after all that? What's going to happen a few years down the road when these people have built their building and the competition means that profits for it diminish and maintenance diminishes and the building diminishes? Then Columbia will be left with this huge project.
Thank you. Any comments, the commissioners?
Add one. So we did do a traffic impact analysis using a professional engineer, Mike Ridgway. So he did the study, and therein what drove the recommendation for our right in, right out, and the divided and the median. So I feel that a lot of good due diligence has been done to ensure that we are not further complicating a problem that may already exist. And also, I did want to speak to a typical student developer develops apartments with bed bath parity. If you have had a chance to, or if you're familiar with our design for this project, it does not include bed bath parity. It is more of a market rate design for the Columbia market. So I don't know if that helps you understand the context. And I live in Chicago and have occupied a number of small apartments. It's not unusual in urban markets to occupy units that are of the size of what we're proposing. It's pretty typical, and our competitors out there very much are in the same boat with the size. Any other questions for me?
I have a couple questions for for you and the architect. As far as the height and the massing, was any consideration given to a lower height? Or was the approach to how tall can we go till someone says no?
Part of this comes into the parking requirement as well. So, but yes, we've looked at multiple variations. I mean, the idea is to always try to get the building down as much as we can, and in order to keep in scale of the neighborhood. We feel that we have done that in terms of this corner, this part of the city. But I don't know if that answers your question entirely.
Yeah, it does, and I mean, I want to, commend the effort and the project, and I like the finishes, but for me, I think as sympathetic as I am to the pedestrian and student issues, I am struggling a little bit with the mass. I don't really think we have purview over how the students behave and what they do, but I think with respect to the building the building itself, I like the finishes. I like the direction you're going. It's just the scale of it is while part of it I find in keeping, part of it I don't. So I'm trying to get my head around if like the finish changes, the masonry coming up would pull it down, or if there was a way to bring it down some. I'm just.
We've tried to compress, the elevation as much as we can. It is a challenge, and part of this, and I'm sure all of you all understand, with development-driven work, is that it's based on a financial pro forma, and in order to, like I said, part of that ties into that parking calculation and the parking that is required for this zoning. And in order to, could the height come down potentially if the parking requirement was not what it is with this zoning requirement? So there are caveats of sort.
And then from the parking requirement, is that driven by zoning?
It is.
And I guess where I'm going with that is I'm just been thinking in a lot of the in these kinds of projects, whether they're students or young professionals, is there more flexibility in lowering the parking requirement, seeing that a lot of the occupants don't have as many vehicles where it would enable them to lower the height?
They could.
And I may be out of.
Some of their parking is obtained off-site with regards to the 400 feet allowed by the DD. And I believe any further reduction would have to be by the Board of Zoning Appeals for variance, which would then speak to their performer and how much on-site parking they have to accommodate their residents.
Okay.
And it's, I personally can't speak to the financial nature of the development, but.
Thank you.
And what were the heights of the hotel across the street and the law school?
We believe it's around 70 feet.
Okay, and the law school is 60?
60 plus, yeah.
So you were able to obtain the height of those two buildings, but not of the church adjacent?
I don't have the church height right off the top of my head, but we knew from the very beginning that even if we do a 4 or 5 story building, it will be taller than the church directly adjacent to it.
What about McMaster? That's in the.
Yes, between
the height of that.
I do not know the height of that.
Is it okay to ask Derek Bruner the height of that building? Is he here?
I believe it's about, I'm thinking Master is about 45.
45.
I think the church is about 40 to the peak of the gable, I believe. I did some measurements on pictometry the other day. I don't have it all with me, but they're about 40, 45.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
If you Google Trinitas, you will see what their business is. Their business is renting to students. And so the idea that young professionals will live here is misplaced. This is a student development, and the mass of this and the consequences of that mass are what we're concerned with. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other deliberation? Any comments?
I'm sorry, could you just expand a little bit more for me on this parking requirement? Is that based on the square footage of merging the 3 parcels, or?
Parking is derived from the size of the units, but generally it's 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit.
So to say, the architects would say, you were saying that the mass and scale and the number of units of this building was determined by number of parking spaces required. That sounds backwards to me. I'm confused by that.
What they're trying to say is that they're trying to accommodate as much parking that they're required to have on site.
But if you had a 4-story building, then the number of parking spaces would be fewer, correct?
That is correct, but
Okay.
if we were to have a 4-story building, it wouldn't be economical at all to put the parking underground. The parking would have to go in the first 2 floors or 3 floors. Therefore, a 4-story building becomes a 2-story building residential, while the rest has to be parking to satisfy that. So that's why we're spending a lot of money into the parking, burying it to be able to balance the unit count with the parking as much as possible, because underground parking is very expensive.
Thank you.
So essentially from that section, if we were to have, let's hypothetically assume this was a 5-story building, right? The first 2 stories would be parking and amenities, and then we'll really have a 3-story building on top of parking, which at that point, it doesn't really justify the value, but providing 3 stories of underground parking, we do have to get the most out of it because it's expensive construction.
Could you provide 1 story of 1 level down parking to create the amount of parking that we would need if it was a smaller building?
I don't think I'm equipped to answer to the economics of it because I'm not.
Well, you said it was
I don't see the
expensive to go down 4 stories, so I assume you would know how expensive it is to go down 1 story.
Generally speaking, yeah, but I don't see the numbers, so.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody would like to make a motion?
Also, just to remind you, there's 2 motions we need to make, so one for site plan and one for the design approval.
All right. We're going to do the new construction motion, correct? Are we going to do both of them for one motion?
Separate. 2 separate motions.
2 separate, okay. Anybody would like to make a motion?
I've got a couple other questions. Yep. For the developer. I just want to come back before we get to motion. I mean, I commend the effort. I think you guys have done a good job working with staff. I'm sympathetic to the pedestrian and student concerns. I know our purview is kind of in the guidelines, and I do like, while I like the finishes, I think I'm just really struggling with the massing. It seems like we've had some projects come in where they're kind of dancing on the fringes of the guidelines, and maybe not really taking into account the full fabric of the areas they're going into. And if there was a way to either make this smaller, I think there would be a better way to get there where this is not so impressing on the neighborhood and the surrounding area. Have y'all explored that?
We've studied this site 7 ways from Sunday, and it's been a challenge. And you know, we did look at the context of the neighborhood and the 4 different styles of architecture that occur within a half mile of this building. So I think we really tried our best to not only pick up elements of the surrounding structures, the style, but to just pay attention to it being an asset and not a negative. Again, not speaking to the use, but speaking to the design. As I looked at that elevation along Gervais, and you look at the law school, you look at this building in that view, it's pretty, I mean, it seems to be in keeping. And you look at the mass of the law school building next to it, it does not strike me as being significantly different. It seems to carry the rhythm of the Gervais Street commercial element more so than the neighborhood, of course, but on the Gervais commercial focus. We studied size, scale, more parking, less parking. We understood that there was a significant concern about parking in the neighborhood too. So to go for a variance to reduce parking would seem to be counterintuitive to the feedback we got about folks being concerned there wasn't enough parking. So I really feel like we have done everything we could to put together a project that is attractive and makes sense for the streetscape of Gervais. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay. Anything else?
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm fine, thank you.
All right.
We have a, step forward, please.
Bobby Lyles, I have not been sworn in.
Can you speak
Affirm
more
to
into
tell
the
the truth?
microphone, please?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go. I live in the neighborhood. I've been living there for about 35 years.
Sorry, could you state your name, please?
Bobby Lyles. I'm an architect in Columbia. In fact, my firm was the architect for McMaster School and for Gibbs Green in the neighborhood. I don't know, and I know Paul knows this, and I know you know this, Bob. I think our firm has done the only underground parking in Columbia, which was First Citizens. And that was about 10 years ago. It was $30,000 a car. So, and that was 2 levels under. I don't see economically this happening. And I'm afraid what will happen is, if it goes forward, variances will be asked to reduce that because it's not going to be financially feasible. That's all I have to say. I couldn't sit here without passing that on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. Anybody would like to make a motion? Everybody done? Please. We got one more gentleman. You sworn in, sir?
I was not.
Affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, sir.
You signed in?
Yes, sir.
Carry on.
Yeah, well, I'll hold it this way. My name is John Stucker, and I reside at 911 Lawrence Street in the neighborhood. I want to repeat a lot of the things that were said already by my fellow neighbors and other folks. I was formerly president of the University Neighborhood Association and involved in a lot of the work with the university, the issue that was raised about trying to move the density of student housing away from this neighborhood and going west was a key issue. As Tom Gottschall pointed out, we have a written agreement to that effect with the university. That, of course, applies to the university, not to private people, but the concept, I think, remains. And all this talk throughout here about scale and size and the adjacent structures, the law school, the new double Hilton hotel across the street, and so on. Well, WIS Studio has been there for years. South Bank, has a little 4-story building next block over on Gervais. None of those structures, including the law school, including McMaster, will bring into one location over 500 students who will live at that location and will go as other students do in Columbia Hall and Capstone and of course, individual housing around the neighborhood that students live in. Will be going back and forth through the neighborhood, daytime and nighttime, pedestrian and vehicular. When years ago we were working on traffic problems in our neighborhood, and traffic engineering, city's department, came in and did a study of Lawrence Street. That's where been living for 32 years, watching that traffic, and the results of it were that was the most heavily traveled side street in the city of Columbia, rivaling some of the main thoroughfares, not Gervais, certainly rivaling Pickens in terms of the volume of traffic. This is simply going to add to that, okay? So it has, the whole question of the massing and the size, it's not just the size of the building compared to what's nearby, it's what is going to occupy that building and then the impact of their presence and the behavior, which is, normal behavior. They're going to be going out in the daytime and evening. I think that's what we really have to focus on when we're talking about size in this whole proposal here. Thank you.
Again, I'd like to, anybody would like to make a motion on this case?
I'll try to make the motion. I wish you were doing this, Harris. A little bit better at it than me. I would like to make a motion that we deny the certificate of design approval for new construction for 1600 and 1620 Gervais Street within the City Center Design Development District.
Could you please state specific reasons having to do with the guidelines?
Based on the mass and scale and use of the building being incompatible with the adjacent University Hill and University, the adjacent historic districts.
I'll second that.
I take a vote.
Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Mr. Broom?
Yes.
Mr. Cohn?
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Is there a motion with regards to the site plan?
Yep. I'd like to make a motion that we deny the certificate of approval for new construction for the request for site plan approval for new construction at 1600 and 1620 Gervais Street, City Center Design Development District, based on the usage, proposed usage, mass and size, mass and scale of the building proposed in relation to the adjacent historic neighborhoods.
That's with regards to the, is that with regards to the site plan itself? How the site, how the building's laid out, parking, driveway, curb cuts, and those types of things?
What all is included in the site plan? You said driving, parking,
It'd be the way that the site is laid out, so the.
not including the mass and scale of the building?
No.
Okay.
That's,
But the footprint is still the same?
Correct.
So yes. Do I need to state that in a different way?
the site plan is more so the technical review, so does it meet the stormwater requirements? Does it meet traffic engineering or the parking spaces outlined and those types of things?
Without taking into consideration what the use will be?
The use is not
Yeah.
germane to that, so the zoning, the use of apartments is permitted.
But the mass and scale of the parking, 4 foot below ground to accommodate the proposed number of units, that could be, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Second?
I'll second that motion.
Vote?
Yes.
Mr. Broom,
Yes.
Mr. Cohn,
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins,
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt,
Yes.
Ms. Moore.
Yes.
Motion passes.
The next case, please.
The next case is 1401 Assembly Street. This is a request for certificate of design approval for new construction in the City Center Design Development District. This proposal at the northwest corner of Assembly and Washington is for the development of a 15-story private student dormitory building with structured parking. The building will have 216 units with a total of 679 bedrooms. The applicant received a special exception from the Board of Zoning Appeals in December to increase the residential density from the allowance of 150 beds per acre. The proposal includes 405 on-street parking spaces. This also has a request for site plan approval and a request for design approval. And Jonathan, did you want to add anything?
Yes, just that this is a private dormitory. So these is 206 units, 679 beds. There's 32 5-bedroom units, 86 4-bedrooms, 32 3-bedrooms, 23 2-bedrooms, and 33 1-bedrooms. And there's also a 170,000 square foot parking garage. The required number of off-street parking spaces for this development is 509, whereas the applicant will be providing 405 in the parking garage, and 404 of the spaces will be provided within 400 feet of the development. And also there are required numbers of bicycle parking spaces that are required, which is 170, which is 0.25 per bedroom, whereas 175 will be provided. Should the commission be inclined to approve the site plan, we'd ask that the site plan be approved with staff comments because there's still some tweaking that needs to be done with regards to the off-site improvements.
I guess we're going to turn over the presentation to the applicant to make the presentation. Here, this is forward.
All right, everybody step forward, has signed and been sworn in, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Carry on.
Okay. Thank you, Commission and staff, for your work on this project and your consideration. Just going to quick...
Let me interrupt just 1 second. This rendering I'm looking at, is that Assembly Street elevation?
This is looking at the corner of Assembly and Washington. So that hard corner there is, what is it?
Okay.
Library.
Thank you. I just want to get my head.
I'm Mark Lecoq. I'm Senior Vice President for CRG. This is Andrew Savoy. He's the project manager for this development, and this is Robert Neely, the Senior Architect for the development. CRG, just by way of introduction, is a vertically integrated real estate development firm. What that means is that we do development, construction, and architecture in-house. So we're working together for the same parent company and on the same team.
Pardon me, so sorry. Is the green light supposed to be on? I don't know if that's what it means when it's recording or...
No, this is for the...
Okay, thank you.
They're the presenter.
Thank you.
As a firm, we focus on urban and higher density development across the country. We like to be in transit-oriented and walkable areas that are close to lifestyle, educational, and employment centers, just like this location here. We have other projects of similar size, both in terms of just the size of the building itself, but similar size from a financial standpoint around the country. So this is the type of building that we desire and do in fact build across the United States. We have active projects in Chicago, Fort Worth, San Diego, Miami, St. Louis, and here, of course. Some of those are student focused, some of those are more traditional multifamily apartments. We're here obviously today for your feedback on this project. There was a previous design approved by this commission or by a different version of this commission a few years ago, and our current design does attempt to be respectful of that prior design, at least to the extent that it's pragmatic and possible. Many of the things that we'll discuss today and that Andrew will walk you through are consistent with not just what we're proposing today, but which was previously approved a couple years ago. Likewise, many of the recommendations and comments and even feedback as we've progressed our design from staff are exactly the concerns that we've had as good developers, and we hope that our design appropriately mitigates those items. Part of what we're doing here is never designing the perfect building, but designing the best building possible given the site and the surroundings and what the use will be. And we believe that this design does achieve that. So I'm going to turn it over now to Andrew Savoy, project manager, and he'll walk you through the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to start. I want to start with the location of the site. I'm sure you know, northwest corner of Assembly and Washington Streets. The Richland County Library is our neighbor to the north. This slide shows our building, our proposed building in context. It's basically an 11 stories of residential units in a U shape above a 5-story parking deck. We are hugging the property line at both public rights of way in order to continue the urban wall, similar to what the library is doing. And we're setting back from the library and working with them to create a public plaza that would connect Assembly Street to their rear parking lot. And this could be programmed and used by them as an extension of their space. They have given us a letter of support for this, and that should have been included in the application materials. This is a detailed site plan, and this shows you a little more, with a little more detail of what we're planning for that plaza to the north. It also shows the U shape with the amenity deck facing south, getting sunlight. And then you can barely see there's a dotted line along both rights of way that are meant to indicate the recessed windows and material elements that are meant to give the facade a certain depth and articulation that I think we both agree is very important for this architecture. So this is our lower level plan. We're proposing that vehicular entry and exit occur at this level only. In the previous design, we had 2 curb cuts, one along Assembly and one along Washington. We've now consolidated all the parking along Washington. We've done a traffic impact study that has confirmed that Washington can handle the increased capacity of these 405 cars. And it did recommend a few upgrades to the signaling and to the sidewalks and to the median, which we are happy to do as part of the project. One thing you'll notice is that on the western side of the Washington Street elevation, there are several mechanical rooms. And those rooms need to be there because the utility companies need access from the public right-of-way to remove and reinstall equipment if they find that necessary. These rooms were in the exact same place the first time we got this project approved, so that has not changed since the last time. Another thing you will notice is that we've pushed our core all the way to the east to facilitate a clean circulation of our parking deck. Previously, we were only proposing 2 floors of parking, 1 floor with an entrance on Washington Street and another floor with an entrance on Assembly Street. Now we have the circulation occurring within the parking deck, so we've had to move the core a little bit to the east to facilitate that. This is the main entry level, it's level 2. So we've positioned our lobby at the intersection of Washington and Assembly. And the core is positioned so that the elevators are very convenient to the lobby entrance. And then we flanked as much of the Assembly Street elevation as we could with amenity space and program active space. And about half of the Washington Street elevation is also amenity space. The other half is double height space for the mechanical areas. And we located that in the area that we thought made the most sense. It's on Washington Street, which we view as the secondary street, as far away from the corner as possible. So we do acknowledge that the pedestrian experience is very important, so we've tried to locate that in the place where it makes most sense. This plan shows our amenity deck. This is a south-facing deck. It'll include a pool deck, cabanas, clubhouse, lounge, and a fitness area. This is our typical residential floor, floors 7 through 16. And this has 19 units per floor, 63 beds per floor, I believe. So this is the Washington Street elevation. And so our intent here was to accentuate the tower elements on each side of the design. And the podium element in the middle is meant to relate to the scale of the surrounding context. So the podium in the middle is about the same height as the library is. And on the 2 tower elements, we have corbelled brick, which is each course is offset to create a shadow line, only on the 6th floor and down to create a datum line that relates to the scale of the surrounding context. And then in the back, we've clad the building with light-colored stucco with the intent so that will fade away and kind of disappear. So we're really trying to accentuate the verticality of the building. Oh, and along the mechanical rooms, we've clad that with a perforated metal screen. So one of the questions in the staff comments was the percentage openness of each facade. So on the ground level here, it's 55% open if you count the perforated metal screens as open. And then above, it's 53% open. This is the Assembly Street elevation. Again, we're trying to accentuate the verticality here, so we've clad the core in a different color brick. If you were to squint your eyes, the whole facade seems square, so we wanted to really accentuate the verticality here. And there's a similar corbelling strategy to help the building relate to the scale of the library to the north. And then the corners, of course, glass. This is the back elevation of the building. And this shows a tiered plaza that would be the southern entrance to the library. And we would be partnering with the library to select a muralist to mural this wall in whatever way they think is appropriate. So this would actually be program space that the library could use. And this is the west elevation, similar to the north elevation. So this perspective is showing what the building would look like standing at the intersection looking down Assembly toward the library. This is a perspective from across the street. This is a perspective of the entry, and this shows that corbelling detail that creates a shadow line on the lower floors. This shows the entry of the entry into the library plaza. And that's it. I have an appendix here just in case we need to reference any other graphics if you guys have any questions. Okay, so with that, we'll turn it over to you.
Go to the site plan, please. That curb cut along Assembly Street,
Yes, sir.
is that for like lift
Well,
or service or what?
what that is a result of is we have our core on that elevation, and it makes the most sense to use that core as a trash chute as well. So there's a trash room along that elevation, which can be seen here. Here, and that door, that overhead door, is a door to the trash room. So when we first presented this design back in 2016, that was the location of the trash room. But at the time, we had not yet had extensive conversations with SCDOT, and they're requiring that pull-out, is what they're calling it, so that a garbage truck can get out of the way of all the traffic going down Assembly and not block traffic while they're emptying the trash.
And it reduces the sidewalk to 6 feet, is that correct?
Well, in the notes, it references 6 feet. The actual distance on the public right-of-way is 6 foot 6 inches, and then we're setting back 2 foot 4 inches, so the total depth is 8 foot 10 inches.
Of sidewalk.
Of sidewalk, yes, sir.
There no other location for a trash truck to pick up trash?
There's not another location that doesn't have severe repercussions to the financial performance of the design of the building. Go ahead.
Well, and in addition to that concern, I mean, we really want to activate the ground floor facade, right? And so we want our primary residential entrance, we want the primary activated lobby, which we design our lobbies as far more than just a reception desk and an elevator bank, right? It's furnished. It's meant to be a place where people can gather, study. I mean, it feels more like a coffee shop, frankly, than a residential lobby. Not that we're running a coffee shop out of there, but I think you understand the analogy. And so having the residential lobby on Washington Assembly means that the elevators need to be in pretty close proximity to that lobby, which means that the vertical penetrations through each floor, which house the garbage chute, need to be close to those elevators, which means that the garbage room needs to be close as well. So, like any design, yes, there are other options, but there are negative implications of putting it elsewhere that are challenging, and we feel like this doesn't solve every problem, but creates some positive aspects, and we're mitigating that issue by having this pull-off here.
Staff know of any other locations along Assembly Street where there are similar trash pickup pull-off lanes?
From a staff standpoint, going through the case summary, that's why we asked that should the commission grant approval of the site plan, that we would work with the applicant to reconfigure all of the right-of-way improvements with regards to wider sidewalks, a new pull-off lane, relocation, landscaping, and on-street parking and curbing, just because staff also kind of has a concern about that location on Assembly Street, and we want to work with the applicant to try to see if there's any other alternatives. And if we can't agree, then we would ask that the site plan, the off-site improvements be brought back to the commission if we can't work out a solution.
And we're absolutely committed to having those discussions and getting further feedback, and are confident that within reason we can come to a conclusion. Obviously, the SCDOT input has got to be taken into account there on that curb cut, but we're more than happy to work with staff and continue that process of give and take. And
is that the library's parking lot behind?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir. To the west of our building, that's the library parking lot.
Is there like any kind of access easement or cross easements for potentially putting the trash back there?
Well, it's already a pretty complicated easement scenario. So they're giving us an easement along the west side of our site. because there's 15 feet of clearance that's required in front of that wall. And we're giving them an easement along the top 10 feet of our site for their plaza. And at this point, that's been a pretty harmonious negotiation. And to say that we want to pull the trash out of that side of the building.
Oh, there's a stairwell over there. I'm just
There is.
looking, because I mean, that is one of the main corridors coming through town.
Yeah.
It just seems.
It would be, they would lose parking is what that would mean. So, I don't know, what do you think about that? I mean, we could have that discussion.
It's certainly something we've considered. We're open to having that further discussion, but it really relates less to how you get the trash from the building to the street and more how you get it from within the building to the ground level, right? And that goes back to my comments about the residential lobby, the elevators, the vertical penetrations being a long assembly.
So the roll-up door is where behind is the trash chute.
Empties, right?
Trash chute.
Correct.
Okay. Well, how's that work? I mean, you got a garage door opener there, and the garbage truck comes by. How is he going to have access to your garbage? Are you going to have a remote to operate the door?
Yeah, the service provider would have access to that door.
Yeah.
The trash bins would be on casters or rollers, and you'd roll it out to the truck and load it to the truck.
So they would park there while pedestrians are walking in between that corridor as well? Carry trash from the building to the truck?
Like a typical urban garbage pickup, the truck would stop, it would remain running. The technician or the person managing the truck would load the trash in, so yes.
And we would also work with the vendor to arrange for them to pick it up on off hours, early mornings, late evenings.
Which is also standard for this type of location and building, to time your trash where you're doing it at low peak traffic.
As a reminder, the commissioners need to speak into the microphone. Any questions?
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Harry.
So, when this came, and this is just a curiosity question, but what led to the departure from the fenestration from the 15 submittal?
Yeah, what led us to resubmit the design?
Well, I like the project. I remember the first one and was just curious. I think, I'm just looking at some of the fenestration and,
Sure. I think I can at least bridge
Sure.
the context from 4 years ago. So it was really driven just by the pro forma of the building and just sort of what the market was asking for this type of project. So at that time, we were very light on parking. We just had the 2 floors. And so that proved to be a bit of a handicap in terms of getting the support for the project just from the marketplace. So when we revisited the project, we tried to address that by adding the parking levels, and in spirit above the 5th level from level 6 and up, we really kept the same character. I know we worked with the panel, with the committee, multiple times over months to get to a solution that I think everyone felt comfortable with aesthetically. So we really tried to honor that. And then when we added the parking podium, it changed the mass at the street level. And so right now we have the garage, we have that service access for trash. That was still there, it was just into a garage. So I think sort of some of the pieces that have come up now are more, I think, development items, because as Andy had said, we hadn't talked to SEDOT at the time, and so some of those comments may have come up, but we're just being a little more proactive now in trying to resolve all those issues. But in terms of the masonry, the glass on the corners, the corbelled brick. And even where we're showing the electrical equipment, I think that essentially we're just duplicating that same strategy that we had previously in the spirit, if not quite literally.
Any more comments, questions?
Just have a question, if you wouldn't mind addressing the city center guidelines state that projects should be sympathetic and compatible with surrounding buildings in terms of mass, scale, height, and in 5.3, building mass and organization, the height and scale of new buildings within the city center should complement existing structures. Could you speak to, it's a very tall building, so if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So unfortunately, we don't have a
site aerial.
Yeah, like a site aerial to show the context. Maybe, do we have one that's further out? Well, unfortunately, I don't think we can show this context directly, but we've really considered this building. This is something we spent more time, and we'd be happy to share this with you on the BOZA hearing, but we've really considered this building as part of the city center, right? So, we're looking for higher density, walkable type neighborhoods. I mean, certainly Assembly is a higher traffic, higher density street. And that's true both towards the center, towards Main Street, and also towards the university on Assembly, and that's really how we've conceived this structure within that context. And you're right, it's a vertical building, but from a total height perspective, yes, taller than the library, but not necessarily taller than buildings within, say, a 3 or 4 block radius towards Main Street.
Which buildings are comparable?
Yeah, and we'd have to follow up with something showing that context, but I'm referring to.
Do you know if any?
Just a little bit, just because we are in the city center, so in terms of the scale, I think we're.
Mark, please.
Because we are in city center, the height is, we're within the acceptable levels. I think, though, in terms of being a residential building, the buildings adjacent to us, we have the library, which is very modern, glass and concrete. So we're trying to address that within the corners of the building with all glass. But then as we went taller, because we're a residential building, we felt that the brick masonry was more sympathetic and more in keeping traditionally with a residential building. I mean, there's the Wells Fargo building. I don't know the street addresses, but there are some very tall buildings surrounding us, but they're more of the modern era, so they're just all steel and glass, which didn't really seem like an appropriate and frankly economical way to clad the building. So in essence, we were taking clues from the library, the concrete, and even the two-story building across the street, which is all masonry. So it was really more of a eclectic, trying to draw from it and then interpreting those examples within the program for our building, and almost in a sense, sort of establishing a high-rise building for the city center.
Lucinda, do you have any idea how tall Wells Fargo is, or how many stories, or?
Oh, I don't know. It's taller than this. Then there's the 14.
It's taller than the 16-story build being proposed? Okay.
The 1401 Main is, I don't know how many stories. That's probably similar. That's on Main and Washington, the glass building.
Mm-hmm.
The hub on Main Street. And then a couple blocks to the south, of course, is the, what is it called now? The BB&T. So, I mean,
those are all taller?
Main Street corridor, there's a lot of,
okay.
Yeah, high-rise types.
Thank you.
I have a question. So you've had one building approved. How tall was that as compared to how tall is this building?
The first building we had approved was 2 levels of parking and 14 stories of residential. This is 5 levels of parking and 11 stories of residential, so it's the same number.
Okay, thank you.
Concludes our comments. Any more comments?
I have one last one. Have you read the staff comments? Are you amenable to those? Okay. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Are there anybody in the audience who would like to speak, favor or oppose?
I have 2 more questions if we can. No one's coming to speak. That's fine. So personally from a height and a mass standpoint, like I think if there was a location to do it, this is it for me. As far as site plan goes, I think we could probably spend a little time working through the logistics of not putting a trash on the main corridor through the city, or if there was a way to maybe help get us more comfortable. I think the 8 feet coming down there is a little concerning too on the front, right there from the sidewalk standpoint. And then from a fenestration standpoint, I like the height. I like what you're doing conceptually. I don't know if I'm kind of like the recess of the window. There's, I think, a little more to it that maybe we could work through. And I don't know if you'd be amenable to us deferring to like a subcommittee where we could open and have. I don't want to make I would like to see the project move and help you. My motion, I'm not speaking for the commission, but if we make a motion for subcommittee to try to help provide that feedback and get to solutions where we could see this again.
Yeah, I mean, we're comfortable with having further dialogue with a subcommittee or with staff to address those concerns.
Okay.
And get you either something revised or comfortable with what we have designed.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody would like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. Should we do the site plan first? Or, I will make the motion that we defer the applicant's request for a certificate of design approval at 1401 Assembly Street to a subcommittee with a date to be coordinated with staff and the applicant and the commission to work to resolve issues as they pertain to access on the site with the trash on Assembly Street and then pedestrian access on the sidewalks.
Second.
The vote, please.
Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Mr. Cohn?
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Motion passes.
I was left out.
Sorry, did I leave you out? Mr. Broom?
All right.
Motion passes. And just to be clear, for just the public record, a subcommittee, no action is taken, but it's a working session, and then any decisions about the project will be at a subsequent public hearing for the DDRC.
Motion for that.
Anybody like to make a motion on that?
I'll also make a motion that we defer the applicant's request for a certificate of design approval at 1401 Assembly Street for the approval of new construction to a subcommittee meeting to be coordinated with the applicant, staff, and the commission, specifically to address the staff recommendations with breaking up the vertical mass of the building and providing horizontal articulation to relate to the adjacent context. With respect to the site plan too, with the building, relocating some of the service functions in order to provide more active uses on the street frontage and pedestrian-oriented storefronts at street level. And I think overall just to consider the distribution of materials and the fenestration pattern on the upper floors in order to integrate with the volumes of the building and add interest to the upper facade in accordance with sections 5.7, 5.8.2.
I'll second that.
Vote, please.
Mr. Botnight?
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Sorry, Mr. Dinkins?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Broom?
Yes.
Motion passes.
I have a quick question. I thought the previous motion, you'd said you were going to put forward the site plan for deferral, but I think you actually said certificate of design approval. Did anybody else hear that or no?
He did, but he said for the site plan.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Gates?
Please feel free to stop me at any point if you can't hear me. This is a request for, this is an appeal to a staff decision regarding request for a rehearing for a certificate of design approval for site improvements. The applicant came to the Design Development Review Commission meeting in November 2019.
A little tad more.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. The request was for approval of a parking area that had been installed without design approval. The DDRC voted at that meeting to deny the request. On November 20th, 2019, the applicant submitted a new application with the inclusion of the information that parking is not permitted on the 100 block of Lincoln Street. Since the scope of work had not changed, the applicant was not making a new request, but essentially asking for a rehearing. The DDRC's bylaws state, Section 8, the Commission may grant a rehearing of an application which has been dismissed or denied upon written request filed by a party in interest with the Secretary within 15 days after delivery of the decision, accompanied by new evidence which could not have reasonably been provided at the hearing, or evidence of a clerical error or mutual mistake of fact affecting the outcome. While the request was submitted within 15 days, the new material submitted could have reasonably been provided at the first hearing. Staff finds that there is not a mutual mistake of fact, as lack of street parking is an existing condition in many historic districts, where parking on lots is also limited by a variety of factors. Parking can be accommodated on this lot. Therefore, the lack of parking on the street does not create an exceptional circumstance. In addition, while the ordinance language allows for exceptional circumstance, its focus is on parking on the lot, rather than what can or cannot be accommodated on the street. There is no clerical error. Staff informed the applicant that the proposal did not meet the criteria for a rehearing, and the applicant elected to appeal the staff decision to the DDRC. Should the DDRC find grounds to rehear this application, the case would be put on the following month's agenda per the DDRC's bylaws. Staff finds that the application does not comply with the Design Development Review Commission's bylaws, Section 8, and recommends a denial of the request for a rehearing.
You signed in, and
Yes, sir.
thank you.
I swore in. My name's John Acton. I was here before in November related to parking at this location. And, I'll say, as a former commissioner of Richland County Rec Commission, I don't envy some of the decisions you've had to make here at some of these big design events and stuff. So it's, I don't envy that. I'm not a commissioner anymore, so I'm kind of glad about it. We didn't make those big of decisions either, so it was kind of good. But I'm going to tell you, I'm perplexed. I recognize the adversarial nature of the group that came in against one of the projects right next to their location. But I'm perplexed, and I've told it to the city staff, why they are so bent on being an adversarial nature of what I got going on here. Because there's nobody in the neighborhood that I know that has complained about it, but they're continuing to fight, even to the tune of saying, oh, we're not going to allow you a rehearing, when I know in our previous hearing we had long discussion about alternatives of what we could do there. And we discussed the parking situation, and it came to a conclusion of, well, we think you can park on the street. You can get 2 cars in a 12-foot driveway and you can park on the street. And so that was the conclusion I think that the board came to. Even so, the chair at the time, and I don't think he's here, but the chair at the time said, well, I have to park on the street. Our family has to park on the street. So it's not as I was presenting it, there's a safety issue, I thought, of parking on the street and different things. So we accepted that. We went back, and I'm going through trying to figure out how we can come up with a plan on this. So I talked to the parking committee, or the parking services division at the city, and they come back and tell me, we already talked about there's no parking on the opposite side of the street, in that median area. We know there's no parking there, and even the city staff said, yeah, there's no parking there, but they did say, we think you can just park out in front on our side of the street. So I'm going to say it was a mutual mistake of fact. We all thought we could park on that street. And what they're taking now, the position they're taking now, there's no mutual mistake of fact. You could have brought that up. But even they represented, I think, to the commission that, yeah, you can park on the street. So I guess the hearing today is whether or not I can even get a rehearing. And so I'm going to say there was a mutual mistake of fact of whether or not you can park at least on that one side, and even represented by the city that you could park on that. And so we're back to the issue that was presented before of where do we park if we have to delineate that back down. And I think we had a long discussion about whether we can leave it in where it is, how it was, with the variance that I was asking for, or how we need to change it and how we need to delineate where the driveway is so that there can be some reconciliation with the ordinance that's there. So I guess at this, where we're presented now is, do I even get a rehearing on whether or not there was a mistake of fact coming into the first hearing? And then I guess we got to reconvene again, even after that, at the city's request, to find out whether or not we can get a variance. So that's where we are. I think that we should have a rehearing. I think you guys could probably vote on the variance right now, based on what we knew before. The only thing that's changed is I spoke with the city parking, spoke with...
Sorry.
It's presented in the, Ashley Pilgrim, it was presented in the email that she sent to me, who talked to her supervisor, and I said, where can we park so that I don't get a ticket on the street, parking on the street? And it came back clear. She sent us a picture of it and said, you cannot park on this 100 block of Lincoln Street. And so I think we're kind of back to that same issue of, if we can't park where outside, actually in that email, if you look at it, she says, well, you can park on your lot. You need to park on your lot, not on the street. And so that's what brought us in the first place, about the number of spots that we could have on the lot. So And again, a lot of disputes going on these other things. It's been there 6 months. I don't think there's any dispute that's come up. Nobody's complained about we changed some type of architectural design of anything related to where we are. So I'll leave it at that, and I guess we're voting on a hearing request.
Any comments from the commission? My question is, you have any new evidence to show us?
Yeah, the evidence is you can't park on the street, as the parking individuals told us. My issue is, and as they'll say, well, you could have brought that up in the first meeting. What I'll say is it is a mutual mistake of fact, as per Section 8 allows, to get a rehearing, and the fact that they even represented to the commission that you could park on the street out there at the last hearing. So I would think you would admit that that's a mutual mistake of fact. If we all thought, even the commission thought, we could park on that street. So it clears up, which is, I think, the main reason why I was denied the variance. You can park on the street.
There are also options for you to park on the property, though. Yes? Was that not discussed as well previously?
It was discussed, and it was, if you have 3 cars, you can only park 2 within the ordinance, what the ordinance says. So I think I expanded the driveway when we basically bought the house. If we go back to that last hearing, I called a permit division to say, all right, do I need a permit?
I think that we're only able to address the matters regarding the rehearing
That's why I was
option.
just addressing your question. So all right.
Yeah. I was trying to put into context what you've brought up about a mutual mistake of
Okay.
fact. Sorry.
And to me, the mutual mistake is everybody in the room thought we could park on that street at the time of the hearing. Even the staff.
Right, it was part of the discussion, I do realize.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Any more questions to the applicant?
I have a question. Oh, go ahead. My question is I don't know, I'm going to ask it to Amy. I don't know if you're the person to ask. Is there new evidence? You're saying that there's not new evidence, and it would seem that you know what you represented at the previous hearing.
Right, there was discussion for sure about street parking as part of the general discussion, but there wasn't, basically, ordinance allows people to park. 2 off-street parking is required. More than that, I guess you have to stack, and there's not any new or compelling evidence about that can't be accommodated on the lot, I guess.
Thank you.
Are you ready? Any more comments from the commissioners?
I would make them. I'm good.
Thank you, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Another case. Anybody in the audience who in favor of or oppose? Come up, please. Your name? You already signed in. Your name?
My name is Joe Weeder. I'm a
resident of the Granby Mill Village, vice president of the Granby Hill Alliance, and a member of the Mill District Alliance. And these similar situations have been cropping up all over the Mill District, to where people, because of the various parking situations brought on by the mills being developed by PMC and other parking issues, have caused students to park in the neighborhoods. They've developed some of these salt boxes and other residences, and they're warehousing a lot of students in them. So we've got property owners simply paving or putting crush and run down across the lawns. And this is something that's happened since we requested parking permits for our neighborhood because of the students in the mills themselves parking throughout the neighborhood in a kind of a ad hoc fashion. So I think what's going on is, and I'm here to support the staff here in saying that we have to stick to our guidelines. We have to stick to our principles, because these are neighborhoods that were developed before there were cars. I mean, really, even as late as the 1940s, they were, and then with the Granby Mill Hill, there were only 2 cars in the whole neighborhood. So I'm just saying, these neighborhoods were not designed to, and these yards were not designed to be turned into parking lots. So, I mean, so we have to, I really feel with all the development that's going on, particularly with PMC buying up a lot of the houses, we need to stick to what we allow them to pave over. You know, so the neighborhood has some semblance as to what it might have looked like when it was a walking neighborhood at the turn of the century. So I would say we're here to support the staff, both the Granby Mill Village and the Granby and the Mill District Alliance, which is a trinity of the 3 mill neighborhoods. That's I wanted to just speak in support of the staff.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions to this case?
Oh, I have one other comment. When I drove by this, when I had heard from the staff and I drove by and took a look at it, the parking lot, the parking spaces were filled, and there was parking on the lawn as well at this particular residence.
Thank you.
So I would
Sense of the zoning issue.
I would like to ask a question. I'm gonna choose to ask Amy. Maybe you're not the right person. It seems to me that what we're doing here is addressing whether or not we can rehear the case versus arguing or discussing whether or not it should have been approved. So that wasn't really new evidence.
Right.
Okay.
So there's clear criterion which Megan covered, and it gets a little ambiguous, I guess. Not ambiguous, but the mutual mistake of fact is probably where most people are getting a hiccup, and we were just trying to clarify that, you know, the ordinance language is very clear about what's permitted, and there wasn't a mistake of fact about that, and that there's, basically that's what your criteria are.
Thank you.
Any more questions? So you have more to say?
Of course, if we're going to respond to, I think that was more of an issue, not a rehearing issue, more of a merit issue. I mean, if you want me to respond to that for what this gentleman was talking about. I don't know. I think you were clearing that up, though.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
I think I'm fine.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
No.
Anybody would like to make a motion, please?
I'll make a motion. Specifically, I don't think it would change necessarily. I would make the motion that we approve the applicant's request for a rehearing at 117 Lincoln Street, based on the prior session's situation with a misunderstanding of fact with respect to off-street parking. And I would also like for the record to make sure my motion doesn't construe this as any kind of future approval.
Anybody for second? I'll second. Take a vote, please.
No.
Yes.
No.
No.
Abstain.
No.
That states what? What does the new motion need to state? Okay. Sorry.
I'll make a motion to deny the recommendation at 117 Lincoln Street based upon the fact that it does not comply with the DDRC's bylaws, Section 8.
Yes, second.
Second.
Cast a vote, please.
Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Mr. Cohn?
No.
Mr. Dinkins?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Abstain.
Mr. Bram?
Yes.
Motion passes.
The next case is a request for a certificate of design approval for an addition and site improvements at 2200 Hampton Street. This circa 1952 structure was the home of Good Samaritan Waverly Hospital from 1952 through the hospital's closing in 1973 and has been vacant since. The applicant will also be undertaking repairs to the original structure as a part of the project, but items related to the building restoration will be handled at staff level. The addition to the historic building is sited near the intersection of Hampton and Pine Streets, in a vacant area which once contained a structure that housed nurses who served the hospital. This residence was demolished several decades ago. Staff has been working with the applicant and the State Historic Preservation Office, who will also have review of the project since November of 2019 on the design for the addition. Staff is recommending approval of the project with several conditions. The first staff recommendation relates to the clear story and brick first story as visible from Hampton Street or the north elevation. These two stories do not align, which is not a pattern that is found on the original structure. The vertical planes of the original structure are very simple, clean lines. Part of the success of this addition is its continuation of the simplicity of the original structure. These stories should be altered so that the walls are flush on the same plane to continue the simplicity from the original structure through the rest of the addition. This change is shown on page 9 of the packet, labeled Staff Recommendations in red. Also visible from this elevation is the two-story awning, which on the current plan does not align. Staff is recommending that the two pieces of the awning align. The remainder of the recommendations are related to the applicant providing staff with more information prior to receiving final approval from staff. The staff recommendation is as follows. Staff finds that the addition and site improvements at 2200 Hampton Street generally complies with Section 11 of the Waverly Guidelines and Section 17-674F of the City Ordinance, and recommends granting a certificate of design approval with the following conditions. The walls of the clear story and brick first story should align. The two levels of the awning as viewed from Hampton Street should align. Further information be provided with final approval deferred to staff for the following items: awning design, window and door design and glazing, the junction between the brick on the Hampton Street elevation and the front openings on the Pine Street elevation, the metal cornice, louvered and pre-finished metal panels, location and screening of ground and roof-mounted utilities, the design of the wood privacy fence and brick wall, and all other details deferred to staff.
The applicant here today?
My name is Jerome Simons. I'm with GMK
Sir,
Associates. I'm sorry.
Have you sworn in?
Yes, sir. And I've
Okay,
signed it.
I don't remember. Thank you.
I'm Jerome Simons with GMK Associates. I'm the architect on the project. We've been working on trying to get this building repaired and preserved for probably a little over 10 years, and hopefully we're finally there. The addition is we're designing it to be a studio and a memorial to the Emanuel 9. As everyone knows, Senator Pinckney is a graduate of Allen University, and so the building is going to be named in his honor, and of course, again, dedicated to the memory of the 9 that were lost in Charleston. The main function of the building is for a studio that will be used towards a new program for Allen, which is the Institute on Civility. And so as part of the Institute on Civility, they will have presentations that are broadcast around the world that where two people come in and civilly discuss different topics. And people, not just anyone, but people who are educated on those topics and can really bring about a conversation about things that are, with opinions that are different, that, and have those conversations and have an intelligent conversation about those types of things. The main interest of the building is going to be a gallery memorial dedicated to the Emanuel 9, and therefore we'll have main access along Pine Street. This view is, of course, on Pine Street, and so what you're seeing is a louvered panel that has the names of the men and women who were lost, as well as exiting from the main studio space. The building was designed to be in keeping with the original building, which is streamlined, modern, and we kind of used some of the similar lines, materials, concepts as the original building. And we just wanted to try to honor the Emanuel 9 at the same time, honoring the original building as well. And so, and I'm hoping that we were able to accomplish that task. I think that's all I have, unless you have any questions.
Can I just add something?
Sure.
We've worked with Jerome for a while on some different projects, but this one we thought was a really appropriate and beautiful addition to the building, which is reflected in the recommendations, but a great project and an important one. So, yeah, it's great to work with you on this.
Appreciate that.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So the staff recommends granting a certificate of design approval with certain conditions. So your presentation is beautiful, and you've been obviously working with staff. So are you making a presentation and everybody's in agreement with what the staff recommendation is, or?
I mean, my only concern was with the, if we can switch over to the street side. Part of the logic behind, I guess the request was that we pull the lower canopy, main entry canopy back in line with the main roof line at the along the Hampton Street side. Okay.
Should be.
Well, I guess if you look on the far end nearest to Pine Street, the lower canopy extends out a little further than the upper roof line, and the intent behind that is to try to provide a little more emphasis to the main entrance to the building. If you look from the again, the goal is, since the entry to the addition is kind of around the corner from Hampton Street, the main entrance to the Waverly Hospital is on Hampton Street, and it's very clearly defined. But they're going to be people who walk up to this building. They're going to need some, a little bit of guidance to the main entrance to the addition. And so, as part of that, we provided this portico that's out front. It's curved. It tries to kind of guide the eye and guide the individual around the corner to the main entrance. And as part of that, I wanted to extend out that canopy just to kind of give you an understanding of, here's Waverly Hospital entrance, but here's the entrance to the addition. And so to pull the pedestrian, the person around that corner, I felt like it was a good idea. And I think part of what makes things kind of special is that it's different. And so I didn't want it to have it in the same line as the main roof line. And so for that reason, I pulled that lower roof or lower canopy out a little further. As far as the other recommendations, I'm fine. I think those are great. This is the only one that I had any concern about.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Megan, could you just speak to that then? Why are you making that recommendation?
It was really to continue the clean, kind of simple lines of the vertical planes of the original structure. That was really the rationale there. There wasn't really anything on the original building that suggested that there should be a portion of the addition that didn't align.
Okay. And how much further does it extend than the other from?
It's around 2 to 3 feet, but that's also kind of if you look at Art Modern building or Streamlight Modern buildings, they'll often have a curved canopy that kind of wraps around corners, and those oftentimes extend beyond the face of the building. So that, even though we don't necessarily have that detail on the original building, that is a very common detail in this style of architecture. And so, even if you look at the curved monument on the far end of the building, we did kind of use that style of architecture as guidance towards this particular design.
Okay, thank you.
I think
Can
that's
you go back to the floor plan, please?
The floor plan.
From the existing, you have a door. That door goes into the new addition. That's the only opening into the addition, is that correct?
Oh, from the original building?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
All right. Another one is ADA. Your ADA access is on the rear of the building?
Yes, sir. The parking, all the handicap parking is also right outside of that.
Parking is behind that?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I'm just happy to see somebody doing something with this building. It's
Me too.
pretty designed.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, looked at it plenty of times, passing by periodically.
And hopefully, again, 10 years, and we're going to actually make it this time, I hope.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody have any more comments or questions or concerns? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I have one comment for staff. So I'm still, if we could come back to the awning, yeah, thank you. This is what you were proposing?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Anybody would like to make a motion on this case? Yeah. Okay, thank you for reminding me. Any more feedback? Or anybody in favor of or oppose the case? All right. Been a long night. Okay, anybody on this would like to make a motion, please?
I'll make a motion that we grant a certificate of design approval with the following conditions for 2200 Hampton Street within the Waverly Protection Area and the request for a certificate of design approval. The following conditions include that the walls of the clear story and brick first story should align, that further information be provided with final approval deferred to staff for the following items. Awning design. Is that the same? I'm sorry, I was trying to eliminate the awning design. Is number 2, the 2 levels of the awning, is that the same?
No.
Separate?
There are additional awnings on
Okay.
the building. Staff is just asking that the applicant provide additional information on what those awnings and materials will look
Thank you. So awning design, window with the exclusion of the awning on the, that we're not including. Window and door design and glazing, the junction between the brick on the Hampton Street elevation and the front openings on the Pine Street elevation, the metal cornice, louvered and pre-finished metal panels, location and screening of ground and roof-mounted utilities, the design of the wood privacy fence and brick wall, and all other details deferred to staff.
Second.
Have you vote, please?
Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Mr. Cohn?
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Yes?
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Broom?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next case.
This next case is a request for a certificate of design approval for demolition of 1211 Height Street. The structure is a circa 1923 two-story wood-sided craftsman-influenced residence and has a hip roof with a hip dormer. The facade features a full-width hip roof front porch. The windows are a mixture of 2/2, 4/4, and 6/6 double-hung wood windows, although some of the windows appear to be a mixture of these configurations. The property has been owned by First Nazareth Baptist Church since 2002. In this time, there has been 1 permit pulled for work on the property and 4 code cases. In December 2019, First Nazareth Baptist Church pled no contest to 8 code violations filed by the city in 2017. Per a court order related to First Nazareth's guilty pleas, the church is required to abate the property by early April 2020 to avoid the city filing new and additional charges against them. The court order does not require that the building be demolished, simply that the code violations be abated to avoid further violations and charges. Staff will now address each of the 8 demolition criteria. Criterion 1. The historic or architectural significance of a building, structure, or object. This structure is contributing to the district and is among less common styles found in the area. The predominant style found from the early part of the 20th century are 1-story shotguns or 1-story bungalows. This structure is among a relatively small number of historic 2-story structures within the district. It has seen some alterations over time. However, the structure remains consistent with the historic character of the district. In addition, the building retains a significant amount of historic material, which is not common amongst structures on this block of Height Street. Staff therefore finds that 1211 Height Street is historically and architecturally significant. Criterion 2. A determination of whether the subject property is capable of earning a reasonable economic return on its value without the demolition, with consideration being given to the economic impact to the property owner of the subject property. The applicant has submitted an estimate for repairs to the structure that is approximately $94,000. The estimate includes a number of cosmetic updates, including new fixtures and finishes, required due to the building being vacant for a significant amount of time. The estimate does not include any major structural repairs, suggesting that the basic integrity of the building is intact. Replacing rotten siding and repairing damaged windows is a part of periodic upkeep on a building, although there may be more found here due to what appears to be a lack of maintenance on the building. The number of code cases and absence of permits pulled for work on the structure suggest a lack of upkeep. The image in this slide show the structure beginning in August 2007 through October of 2014. This next slide shows images of the building from October 2018 and December 2019. This information is also included on page 9 of your packet. The capital that has not been spent on the maintenance of this property over the last 18 years could be used to undertake the necessary repairs. Another option would be for the church to rent or sell the property. 1211 Height Street is zoned to allow the property to be an owner-occupied or rental residence. As a neighborhood within walking distance of a college and a university, there are a number of rental properties in the neighborhood. While the property is not currently taxable as it is owned by a tax-exempt entity, the property is eligible for the Bailey Bill. Based on its current taxable value, the 20% investment threshold would be under $10,000. While, as previously mentioned, the church does not pay taxes on the property, the tax incentives available could serve as a significant selling tool should the property be sold. The property may also be eligible for other state and federal tax incentives. Criterion 3, the importance of the building, structure, or object to the ambiance of the district. This building holds an important place on this block. It is the anchor on this side of the street coming from Gervais Street and serves as a visual reminder of the types of buildings that once populated this area. On the even-numbered side of this block of Height Street, the majority of the parcels are used for parking, with just one historic structure remaining. The adjacent block of Gervais Street is also largely vacant. As previously mentioned, 1211 Height Street is somewhat unique, as it is among a relatively small number of historic two-story structures within the district. The loss of another structure would be detrimental to the district, and therefore staff finds that 1211 Height Street is extremely important to the ambiance of the district. Criterion 4, whether the building, structure, or object is one of the last remaining examples of its kind in the neighborhood, the city, or the region. While not the last remaining example of its kind in the neighborhood, the structure does hold an important place on this street, and its loss would be detrimental to the district. Criterion 5, whether there are definite plans for reuse of the property if the proposed demolition is carried out, and what the effect of those plans would be on the character of the surrounding area. The applicant has indicated that there are no immediate plans for reuse of the property. Allowing for its demolition would create another gap along a border of the district that has already experienced significant loss. The slide above shows some of the loss in the immediate vicinity of 1211 Height Street. Criterion 6, the existing structural condition, history of maintenance, and use of the property, whether it endangers public safety, and whether the city is requiring its demolition. The lack of permits pulled, photographic evidence, and code cases filed against the applicant for this property suggest a lack of maintenance since it was acquired by the applicant in 2002. In 2003, a permit was requested for a gas line. Further permits have not been pulled for this building, as one might have expected to address normal maintenance needs. While items such as painting or small repairs do not require permits, it is clear from photographs taken over the years, which have been included in your packet on page 9, that work has not been done to address larger maintenance concerns. Since the property was acquired in 2002, there have been 4 code cases. 3 of these cases have been resolved through securing and boarding the property, rather than addressing the underlying issues caused by lack of maintenance. The 4th code case, the citation is attached in your packet, from 2017, is as yet unresolved, and the applicant is asking for demolition as the solution to the listed code issues. The applicant has supplied a letter of opinion from a structural engineer that is dated October 18, 2011. It is identical to a set of letters that had previously been provided to staff regarding this structure and 2 others on this street that have since been repaired. This letter indicates that there is structural damage. However, the letter does not contain items that are typically found in a structural engineer's report. When staff recommended that the applicant provide a structural engineer's report, staff indicated that the report should contain pictures, measurements, and written documentation of structural damage. No measurements or descriptions of damage have been provided. The applicant has provided photographs of the structure. However, based on staff's experience, these do not show a building that no longer retains structural integrity. Rather, a home that has been vacant for nearly 20 years. In staff's experience, the damage shown, such as windows with broken glass and areas of rotting siding, can be repaired. Based on what the applicant has provided, the necessary repairs appear to be largely cosmetic and show a building that has been neglected rather than one that is structurally deficient. Although the building has experienced some deterioration, the city is not currently requiring its demolition. Criterion 7, whether the building or structure is able to be relocated and whether a site for relocation is available. Relocation has not been explored as an option for this structure. However, due to the significant amount of demolition in the area, particularly along Gervais Street, staff would not recommend such an undertaking be approved. Criterion 8, whether the building or structure is under orders from the city to be demolished due to severe structural deficiencies, and this criterion shall have added significance in comparison to the criteria mentioned in subsections 1 through 7 of this subsection. The structure is not currently under orders from the city to be demolished. In summation, the property owner has deferred basic and routine maintenance on this property over the course of the last 18 years, leading to its current condition and demolition by neglect. Of the 8 criteria for review of demolition, just one part of one criteria addresses the structural condition of the property. This criterion also addresses the lack of maintenance, also addresses the history of maintenance of the property. Staff has illustrated the lack of maintenance of this property, and indeed, in pleading no contest to the 8 code violations, the applicant has essentially admitted that the property has not been maintained as it should have been. Allowing demolition due to a circumstance created by the applicant is not consistent with the principles of Section 9 of the Waverly Guidelines, which state the demolition of a historic building should be an action of last resort. 3 of the criteria for review of demolition cover the historic and architectural significance of the property. As previously mentioned by staff, this structure is contributing to the district and is among a relatively small number of 2-story structures, both in the immediate vicinity and larger district. The area immediately surrounding 1211 Heights Street has experienced significant loss through demolition. Allowing another contributing structure to be demolished would be a loss not only to the larger district, but the dwindling context around it. Staff therefore finds that the request for demolition of 1211 Heights Street is not in keeping with Section 9 of the Waverly Guidelines and recommends denial. Repairs to the property should be undertaken with approval from staff or the DDRC as necessary within 90 days.
Thank you. Anybody in the audience? Is anybody in the audience that would like to speak for this case in favor of?
Commissioner. I'm Willie Williams, and I'm the agent of record for First Nazareth Baptist Church. I've been sworn in.
Thank you, sir.
I represent 39 lots that the church owns in the historic Waverly community. And I'm presenting a letter from Ron Davis, who is a resident and had a previous commitment at his job at Midlands Tech, and he is in favor of the demolition. The property in question was purchased prior to the historic district being established. The historic district was established in 2005 with the understanding that the properties on Height Street up to Lady Street, back to Oak Street, back to Gervais, would be utilized for parking and further improvements for First Nazareth Church. And that was the agreement that Reverend Scott made with the community in order to establish the historic district. Mayor Coble and Reverend Scott and council members of that time have indicated that in the past, and we can get those affidavits if we need to. The problem we're having here is we made a request prior to this commission being able to turn us down. We made a request to demolish this. And the neighborhood association objected, and we were denied. But the neighborhood association is in the process of promoting gentrification. This is not an African American community any longer. We own 40 properties, but the largest other group is owned by whites. We got 10 groups that are not African American in this historic district. So the significance of the district is no longer an African American historic district. But we have looked at what the income could be on this property if we can't take advantage of the Bailey Act because we're not for profit. If we remodel the property, we couldn't get $2,000 a month income to pay the debt service. And most of the people in the neighborhood who bought houses in there have turned them into student housing. We have 7 residents that got university students living in the houses in the neighborhood now. So it's not an historic neighborhood. We got 10 properties that's owned. We got 7 other properties that university students are renting. So there's no justification to continue to stress this as a historic African American community. We certainly appreciate your consideration.
Thank you.
I'd like to
Anybody?
address,
Excuse me. Go ahead.
I'd like to address something that was mentioned in the early part of Mr. Williams' statement. This parcel is zoned residential, and so parking is not a permitted use for this lot.
Residential?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Next, please.
Good evening. My name is William Pye. I'm a member of First Nazareth Baptist Church and also a legal representative with respect to this case. We would like to point out that this is a structure that has an assessed value of about $43,000, but it's going to take about $93,000 to repair. So from that standpoint, it would have a very detrimental economical impact upon the church. Also, you're talking about a structure that was constructed, as they say, in 1923, about 1,400 square feet. So therefore, it's not economically feasible to do that. Also, the church appreciates the community. We have 9 other structures similarly situated in the community. We own 1213 High Street, we own 1215 High Street, we own 1223 High Street, we own 1225 High Street, we own 1414 High Street, we own 2312 Lady Street, we own 2306 Lady Street, we own 2300 Lady Street. 9 historical structures that we intend to maintain. Now, we have these houses as a part of benevolence. People get burned out, our members get put out, and we have a place that they can go. We're not in there to try to renovate houses, to flip them to make money. We're there to try to provide a service to the community. But this particular structure is cost prohibitive. And we're just asking to tear down this one structure so that we can maintain the other 9. And I think that with the structural damage is already there, and the church willing to maintain the other 9 properties in historical district that's up to code, in addition to the fact that we own 39 other lots. So we have an investment in the community. We just don't want to tear down to destroy the ambience, and we think that the other 9 structures that we own would indeed show our commitment to historical preservation and that we are dedicated to the historical preservation of the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else like to speak in favor of or opposed? Come on, please. You signed in?
Yes, I did.
And sworn as out?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I am, I really think I need to introduce myself as Reverend Frank Houston. I am the president of Historic Waverly. The reason why I said I probably need to introduce myself as Reverend Houston, because when I listened to what the church just told you, the multitude of untruths that were just mentioned to you is unreal, and I'm not sure what book they're reading. But my wife and I have lived in the Waverly community for better than 20 years now. And I am not sure of the motive of the church. What is 1211 High Street in the footprint of? What is it in the way of? Why can't the church be truthful to the community? What is the big picture? What is the real motive of First Nazareth Baptist Church? 2111 High Street is 97 years old. Very rare. It's a historic 2-story craftsman house that was built around 1923. It is a contributing factor to the historic district. When you step back and look at this house, it has a significant amount of materials and design that is very rare in the country, and it needs to be saved. We have seen before First Nazareth's disregard for historic Waverly when they demolished the George Elmore Waverly 5 and dime store on Gervais Street with a historical marker looking at them in the face while they're doing the demolition. So, First Nazareth has no regard for historic properties. According to our guidelines, page 14 of our historic guidelines, Waverly Overlay Guideline, it states that the demolition of a historic building should be an action, the last resort. When the structure is demolished, the community loses its history, which cannot be replaced. One of the character's defining features of this area is the close proximity of structures, which create a tightly woven neighborhood structure. When a house is removed and not replaced, the fabric of the neighborhood is undermined. Accordingly, such requests are reviewed very deliberately and required a detailed information. Additionally, I'm not sure that First Nazareth has even exhausted all that can be done to restore this particular property. I recommend that this property is not allowed to be destroyed. Secondly, not any of First Nazareth's congregation lives in this community. The church, instead of trying to change the landscape of this historic district, the church should be interested in restoring the community that it is located in. The church should restore the properties that they own in the community. The church could build single-family properties in that area that can be very significant to the historic district. After restoring these properties, they can then ask their congregation to move into the neighborhood and restore what is left of Waverly. When I hear what I've heard before I came up, I'm not sure where Mr. Williams is getting his information. It was so full of so much untruth. They have not yet come before the community to explain or to ask or to expound on what they are trying to do to improve historic Waverly. So what is the real reason for First Nazareth trying to remove or demolish this piece of property? What are the intentions? I'm not sure. You just heard that they own 39 pieces of property in the Waverly community. That's a third of Waverly. They can build and restore Waverly to its historic nature with houses that resemble historical architectural design that will make Waverly a place of beauty. But yet, they have no interest in historic preservation, which is a travesty. And for a church to want to do this, to destroy a community, is also a travesty. And I ask that you please do not allow this historical piece of property to be destroyed. I'm not sure if I can have the pictures again of the house placed back up again, just for a quick second. If you look at the ducktail rafters, the dormers, the windows of this structure, you see history. You see a design that is very rare. Why lose that? I have many USC students that come through the neighborhood to want to tour and understand what historically Waverly is about. Is it easy for me just to tell them what the district used to look like? Or is it easier for us to have tours where we can show young people, the next generation, what craftsman housing and historical structures look like? I ask that you do not allow this piece of property to be destroyed. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question of staff, please. May I ask a question of staff?
Okay.
So, this is about, the motion that's in front of us, or the action that's in front of us, is about demolishing a house, and there are 8 criteria that have been examined as it relates to evaluating whether or not the structure, not a neighborhood, not anything other than this specific structure. So there are 8 criteria that you've examined to determine whether or not this house should be demolished, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And does this structure meet any one of those 8 criteria to be demolished?
Staff doesn't find that it meets any of the criteria for demolition.
Thank you.
Can I make one statement, please?
Sir,
I'm sorry.
I think we heard your case.
Okay, I just want to make one statement, though. In 18 years since First Nazareth purchased this house, in 18 years, nothing has been done to it.
Thank you, sir. Gentlemen?
Reverend Houston, I will not let you downgrade Reverend Scott publicly in that manner. We built a $7.5 million structure in the Waverly neighborhood. All of the prostitute houses that you are talking about, we bought all of those properties and cleaned up the neighborhood. Don't tell
Reverend,
me what,
I'm sorry, could you just speak to this? I'm sorry, could you just speak to this property in particular, if you have a rebuttal about this property?
I had this, he called me a liar, and he said First Nazareth hadn't done anything for the community. We have a $7.5 million stake in the sanctuary. He said we didn't have any people living in the house who were members of the church. Stand up, Corey. He lived on Height Street at 1215 Height Street. We have his neighbor in Section B lived on Height Street. Lally Thomas lived next door to them.
We really need to
all
stay.
Of them.
I don't mean to cut you off, but
yes,
we need to stay focused on the
criteria.
Address and the criteria.
But the criteria, from an economic standpoint, that house, the economic life of the property is 30 years. And this one is 90 years old.
Thank you, sir.
Criteria number 4 says whether or not the building, structure, or object is one of the last remaining examples of its kind in the neighborhood. It's not the last remaining example. Also, on item number 2, whether or not there can be a reasonable economic return on its value. It cannot because of the condition of it. So there was 2 criteria we met right there. And also with respect to number 7, about relocation, they said that that's out of the picture in terms of relocating. So I think that with respect to the 8 criteria listed, we met.
Thank you. Anybody else on the audience? Okay. Someone, please make a motion.
I'll make a motion to deny request for a certification of design approval for demolition located at 1211 Height Street based upon the request for demolition is not in keeping with Section 9 of the Waverly Guidelines and Recommendations.
Second.
Take a vote.
Yes. There was an additional.
I'd like to amend the motion. And I would like to retain the motion and amend the motion to include that the property be have repairs undertaken with approval from staff or DDRC as necessary within 90 days.
Second.
Thank you.
Take a vote.
Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Mr. Cohn?
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thanks, Harris.
Our last item on the agenda is 2212 Senate Street. This was we thought we were going to be bringing the property back to y'all with corrections that came last month. We don't have anything new to give you, so I suspect that what we probably need to do is to defer this project until next month, if that is your will. We don't have new information to give you, and the applicant is not here to speak to it.
I'll make the motion that we give the applicant one more chance and defer their request for a certificate of design approval at 2212 Senate Street.
Second.
All right. Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Mr. Cohn?
Yes.
Mr. Dinkins?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller-Wilt?
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Broom?
Yes.
Motion passes.
I don't know where I am now. You'd like to make a motion to let this meeting be adjourned?
Moved.
So moved.
Say
Yes.
aye.
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 Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
I don't even know where I